Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Joining us today for BrightTALK's expert panel on refining your data lake strategy for analytics. My name is Cory Minton. I'm the founder and CEO of Big Data Beard. Big Data Beard is a blog and podcast company focused on exploring the trends, technology, and talented people that are making big data a big deal. I'm excited to have a panel of experts join us today to talk about refining your data lake strategy. Joining us today, we have from Infoworks, Ramesh Menon, who's the VP of Products. We have Jim Youldassis, who's the Program Manager for IBM's Cognos platform in the North America region. And then hopefully joining us here shortly, we'll have Ozzy Johnson, who's the Deputy CTO of Domino Data Labs. Ramesh, Jim, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Glad to be here.
Very well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, and I want to remind our audience that as we get rolling and we ask some questions, we have some conversation, please do feel free to make this interactive. You're able to ask questions and provide feedback using the portal that you're logged in through today. So feel free if you ask some questions. We'll certainly try to address those throughout the conversation. I have one of our trusty partners from the Big Data Beard team, Brett Roberts, manning the question panel, and he'll try to bring those up to us so we make sure and answer your questions in real time if at all possible. Well, let's get started, Ramesh and Jim. I want to just kind of start with a level set of the data lake and a definition of it, because I think it's one of those terms that's been widely used, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes intentionally misaligned in some cases. But Ramesh, why don't you start us off by giving us your definition of the data lake?
Sure. So a data lake is a relatively new concept. We've always traditionally stored data in data warehouses to support analytics, but that obviously had many limitations. Data warehouses were great for what they did, but when organizations started exploring the possibilities with economically scalable systems like big data, the data lake became more practical. So what is a data lake? It's typically a centralized repository that allows you to store all your structured and unstructured data at any scale. So the data could be stored as is without having to first structure the data, conform it into different models, but also be able to run different types of analytics, whether it's more of the dashboard visualizations, BI types of processing, to big data type use cases, real-time analytics, as well as machine learning. It's not a replacement for a data warehouse. We definitely see it as an augmentation, which essentially expands the possibilities for most enterprises.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jim, do you agree with that assessment of the data lake concept, or have a different opinion?
I do. For the most part, the data lake concept materialized because of the proliferation of the large amounts of data that was being collected throughout, various forms, whether it was email, whether it was social media, whether it was flat files, and so on. And businesses and clients, didn't know what to do with that. And when that technology came to be and it was cost effective, now that concept of just dumping everything into this data lake and figure out what you were going to do with it at a later date is, what was compelling at the time. We'll figure out how we're going to consume it and what we're going to do with it, but now let's just keep collecting all this data, and that was what created these data lakes within large companies.
Yeah, so I'm curious, when you think about the benefits that people are trying to achieve, like what was the driving kind of benefits that you saw, Jim, from your perspective on not just why do we collect it, but what is the outcome that we were trying to drive and that organizations continue to try to drive with a data lake strategy?
Right. So the big benefit is getting that big picture. So if you think about a company that, when they're collecting information on whether it's sales, whether it's orders, whether it's their customer behavior, that's a portion of their business. But then when you start, collecting information on sentiment, whether it's through social media, whether it's, through any blog post or anything like that, now you get a bigger understanding of, what drives your customer purchasing power, or, things to drive your company's business in a different direction. So the whole idea around it is, how do you get more analytics based on what's affecting your business from every aspect of it? In the past, when you had this structured format where you can now, put things in a database or a data warehouse, structure, you had the limitations. But now with big data, with all that going into a data lake, all that vast amount of information can give you a bigger view of what's affecting that business. And that's what I think is key nowadays for a lot of these companies to collect all this data, because they don't want to miss out on anything. If they don't look at social media and if they don't look at any other aspects that is affecting their business, they could miss out. So everybody's just collecting all this pieces of data and dumping it into data lakes, and we'll try and get the bigger picture from their business.
That's great. Ramesh, what about you? What are you seeing as the primary motivations behind enterprises really desiring to have a data lake and a strategy to support the data lake?
Yeah, if I'd like to start actually at the sort of the business level as to what were sort of the motivating factors and the benefits. As we know, most companies are trying to go through some process of digital transformation. So the idea that they want to make better use of the data that they already have or that they can acquire to make better decisions about their business, and run their business better, understand their customers better. But the reality was that prior to data lakes, the typical enterprise processed a fraction of the data that they had available, because this was highly curated data that was available for analytics due to cost, due to the flexibility or lack of flexibility of the platforms. So when data lakes came around, it became a real possibility to now deliver on that strategy of digital transformation by essentially providing much more data to support many more analytics use cases. So just greater agility. And what it meant is, I think as to what Jim was saying, it provided a place to put all your data and then start looking at all of these different analytics use cases that the business wanted, whether it's sentiment analysis, better customer segmentation, better fraud analytics, all those kinds of things. And the underlying platform that powered most data lakes, whether initially it was big data systems, but later on cloud platforms, provided that economical scalability, the ability to store and process data that was not necessarily just highly structured, but unstructured, semi-structured. And finally, the promise of new analytics techniques like machine learning and AI to support some of the predictive analytics that the business has been asking for many years. Those are the primary benefits that I can see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I think that's a good assessment that we level set, right? The data lake exists for the purpose of storing large varieties and volumes of data, the things that we've called big data for years, with the expressed intention that we want to provide analytical professionals the ability to process and use that data to become more, as you said, model-driven, more probabilistic and predictive in their approach to business process, which I think is the idea, and I agree. But there's the other side of this, which is data lakes have been challenging for many organizations, so much so that there's people that the term data lake, it really bothers them, right? It has a negative connotation because of missed expectations, technology for the sake of technology, not for, as you said, Ramesh, business outcomes. So I'm curious, in your perspective, and when you talk with organizations, executives, what have been those challenges that when organizations started over the last few years with this idea of having a data lake, but maybe they ended up with a data swamp or a data pond or a data pit, right? What are those challenges that cause data lake projects to go awry or miss those expectations that give it a bad name? Ramesh, I'll start with you. Why don't you outline some of those challenges that you see?
Definitely. So I think the number one challenge was that most people did not realize how complex it would be to handle this type of data, this type of variety on these big data platforms. And as we know, most of these platforms were built on, open source distributed technologies that required people to have pretty specialized skills in being able to write code like Spark or Scala and things like that. And the other part was also that they did not even know about some of the limitations or what they would need to do to build on top of that. So for example, simply getting data into the data lake, being able to parallelize the loading of data without burdening the source systems that you're reading data from to put into the data lake. Another thing that caught many people by surprise was that the underlying systems in many of the data lakes, like HDFS, were immutable. So in other words, things that people had been used to for many years, like update transactions, simply don't happen because these are read-only types of systems. So how do you deal with updating records that come into the data lake? So those were, I would say, just a number of challenges associated just with the technology alone that were just big unknowns. The other part was that without a unified approach to managing, governing, and making use of the data meant that it became, as you said, data swamps, right? So people dump data in, many times multiple people dumping the same data in multiple times without knowing, and it ended up becoming a swamp that was actually not delivering the business benefit that people had expected or anticipated when they first embarked on a data lake strategy. So hence, there have been these statistics we all know about that, the majority of the data lake efforts actually never produced a production use case. And that's, I think, ultimately down to the complexity of making use of these technologies to actually manage the data and derive value from it.
Interesting. Jim, I'm curious, what are the challenges you're seeing for organizations that kind of went through the same process to try to achieve the data lake but have struggled along the way?
Yeah, so, I mean, like anything in business today, if you don't get any ROI from your investment, it would seem like it's a failed try or a failed application in this case. And what I see is, clients will have it in a development or a sandbox environment, but never make that movement into production and getting that in there. All the points that Ramesh, mentioned, all of those are exactly true in its sense as well. But in the end of the day, when clients are spending millions of dollars in technology, in software and application and services, they have to materialize in an ROI. And if that doesn't make itself to a production environment, then that value is not going to be seen as a success. The other thing is that I noticed with a lot of clients when they're trying to implement a data lake into their analytics strategy is, the types of questions that you would ask from a data lake source is not the same what you would ask in, a data warehouse or a relational database. You ask a small defined question from a, relational source, like, tell me what my sales were for the last quarter of 2016. Whereas in a data lake, that question can be much broader and, can have a bigger impact when you're thinking of, doing an analysis, doing any sort of predictive aspect of it, and just trying to get more out of what's in that data itself, so that your question can be much broader. Tell me what, my sales were for that quarter of that year, but, what was the sentiment that happened to be at that time from a specific region and so on. That's where the value of a data lake can come through. So when clients are used to, having specific questions that they would ask their relational source, that's what they know, and they seem to be doing the same thing with a data lake as a source. That needs to be much broader in order to get that value to the surface and get it into production for their analysts to get that impact from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've assessed what the data lake is. We have a good understanding, I believe. I think we agree on the definition. We understand the reasons why organizations want a data lake strategy, but we also understand the challenges that have been between us and success with this data lake concept. But the goal of this conversation, really, and what I want our audience to leave here with, is some practical guidance on ways that they can actually realize the benefits of the data lake as a strategy for the purpose of analytics, how they can be successful, and how they can avoid some of those pitfalls. So Ramesh, I'll start with you. If you were to give us some practical guidance on how organizations today can avoid some of the pitfalls that we outlined and really achieve the conceptual kind of vision of a data lake. Provide us a couple of those tactical things that you would recommend people do to really get data, to get value from a data lake strategy.
Absolutely. I think the first thing is to start with a business benefit or a business goal in mind, because that usually means there's funding, there's attention, and there's support across the organization. So I'll give a couple of examples from our customers. So one of them is an oil and gas company that wanted to analyze the performance of their different oil wells distributed across the world. Now, the data comes in a streaming pipeline, and it needs to be collected and analyzed. And this is exactly what a data lake is great for. Vast amounts of data occurring or arriving at a relatively fast frequency, but also a lot of other on-premise data that needs to be combined, transformed, and prepared into some sort of analytics consumption. And in this case, predictive maintenance types of use cases. So this is something that has a clear business benefit. People rallied around this, and this is something that the technologies provided a new enabling use case that the organization could not have had before. Another example is a customer of ours who's looking at pharmacy insurance claims and trying to detect fraud or other types of errors in the claims before deciding to pay the claim. And this is something that they wanted to do every hour as they process claims that come in from the various drugstores. So having that business benefit, something that moves the needle for the enterprise, is a really good place to start. The second thing is there's so much complexity with these underlying platforms, and being able to do the data engineering necessary to get the data, transform it, keep it synchronized, and deliver it for analytics, that this cannot be done by simply hiring more and more data engineers, because simply you just will never find enough of them with any enterprise. So the answer is to use automation. And automating these processes of data operations, data engineering, is essential to get any kind of reasonable success with these projects. And the last one, where managing the underlying infrastructure could be challenging for many organizations, consider the cloud. We have many of our customers who have started their data lake journey on-premise and then migrated to the cloud so that they can get away from having to manage their own infrastructure, and also get cloud benefits like scalability and elasticity that the cloud platforms provide. So those are three things I would recommend.
Ramesh, I like this. So I captured those as you begin with the business case in mind, which I think is absolutely accurate. I saw once this Maslow's hierarchy of data science, and the thing that I kind of thought was missing from it, the ones that were published popularly in 2017, was that it at no point talked about the business case, and I agree that's where you have to start. And then automation, right? Automate where possible, and then consider the modern resources available to us in the cloud computing context. Okay, so those are great. Those are great tactical pieces of advice. I really dig that. Jim, how about you? What are some practical guidances you could give us to build a successful data lake strategy?
So, like anything, you learn from mistakes, you learn from experiences, you learn from positive everything. I agree wholeheartedly with Ramesh's points about the business case, right? So if there is no business case, there is no value in doing anything, because business is what drives the need for technology in the end. The whole thing about, making the recommendations on how a client can be successful, the one thing that, I look at for a lot of implementation is what caused the failure? What were the failure points in past technologies or something else that now you can change to make it successful? So if you look at the failure points that, and challenges clients had with data lakes in the past, those are the items that you can, address in order to be successful. Additionally, when you look at technology, as technology has evolved, that's also a key driving factor to be successful. So when you're looking at, you're streaming all these vast amounts of data, there is no way possible a human being can actually go through and analyze the different types of data. You need technology for that. And this is where AI comes into effect, because AI plays a key part with vast amounts of data in terms of pattern recognition. And that's key to actually getting, that maximum ROI from, leveraging what you have in your data lake. In the past, it was, let's just get the data in there and worry about how we're going to get it out and how we're going to analyze it and consume it. Now, with AI being in the forefront, now that pattern recognition within your data gives you that jump start into, going further with your analysis, as opposed to starting from point zero. That pattern recognition with AI can get you into, 30, 40, 50%, depending on how good the software is from what you're trying to do with it. So a lot of that is, look at past failure points in order for you to be successful, and make sure that you have a path to get it into production. There's no value if you're just going to be looking at it and you're not going to get it into production, and eventually, you're going to have to consume it. And that's where AI as well has to come into that conversation in order to be successful, because pattern recognition is going to be key to be surfacing these volumes of data that you're going to be, trying to analyze.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned this idea of learn from doing, right? It's trial and error, and I think that's one of the key salient points I hear from talking with both practitioners, executives, and then obviously vendors is this idea that organizations, if they're going to be successful with data science powered by a data lake using this AI machine learning capability we've seen come on in the last few years, if you're going to do that, you have to treat it differently than you've treated many of your other development activities in an organization, and specifically in technology engagements, that it becomes much more of this. It has to be treated like research and development, right? That, as you said, you got to learn by tinkering and trying. And this was reinforced really strongly today. We were at the O'Reilly Media's AI conference here in New York City, and one of the principal data scientists at Microsoft Azure Research talked about the fact that she's a data scientist, and she had a lot of people assumed because she was a data scientist and a PhD in I think it was quantitative psychology, oh, you must have all the answers on how to build models and do this stuff great. And she was very clear. She's like, hey, I want to tell you a secret. You'd learn by doing, right? The same thing. And I think that's organizationally something that when we think about those challenges that people had, where they had this specific idea in mind that analytics looked like what they had done in the past with relational database type queries of reporting, and didn't treat this new capability like a research function, I think it was very different. And it looks like we actually have Ozzy Johnson joining us. Ozzy, are you there?
I am here.
Man, I am so sorry. Just for the purpose of so everybody knows, Ozzy is kind enough to join us. He's, again, the Deputy CTO for Domino Data Labs. And I will fall on the sword here. I forgot to mention to him that this particular platform doesn't support calls to call in via the web. You have to use an actual phone. And so I totally set Ozzy up for failure. And Ozzy, for that, I am deeply sorry. But I would love to get your opinion. We were just talking about some practical advice that you might give to organizations that are struggling with the data lake concept and they're looking to modernize and refine that approach. I'd love to get your perspective on how you view, or some practical advice you could give our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it probably won't sound as lovely as it would through my nice new Yeti mic, but I will offer it up. Yeah, so I was listening for a while here, and I think I generally agree with all the broad points, particularly that it is really about approaching these questions from the perspective of outcomes. If you're not starting with good questions, if you don't know what you're trying to answer, if you don't have at least some good sense of the business value that you're trying to create or achieve, then you're just not set up for success. The way that I sort of sum these things up is that a data lake isn't a solution. It's not a particular tool. It's more of an approach or a lifestyle for dealing with your data. that gives certain capabilities at the cost of certain trade-offs. So you can ingest data faster. You can potentially democratize the consumption of it, the queries that can be run against it. But what you're getting there is essentially a big deferred cost that goes to getting that value back out for realizing the benefit of being able to ingest and store it quickly and to make it available in sort of the least opinionated way. So really, if I were to sum it up, it is really be deliberate, understand what the questions are that you're trying to ask, what the outcomes that you are driving are, and look at the lifestyle or the implementation in terms of those trade-offs.
I appreciate that, Ozzy. One thing, Jim kind of set us up for this, and I think that was a great segue. And again, I apologize for the technical challenges, but certainly happy to have your perspective. But Jim kind of set it up sort of at the end of the answer to the last question, which is this concept that the data lake has to leverage AI in a variety of ways, and it has to feed our model-driven initiatives that are that you could classify as this AI concept. So I'm curious, Ozzy, I'll give you the floor for another couple minutes. What I want to do is, why don't you tell us about the impacts that you're seeing around how AI and machine learning, research and capabilities that have happened in the last couple of years, how that's evolving organizations' approach to a data lake and an analytics strategy.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a thing that I definitely see as having really a current and kind of ongoing inflection point. I've seen AI and ML as a thing that everyone likes to talk about, everyone would like to be doing. There certainly are organizations that are using it effectively, but to this point, it's been more, I think, aspirational than practical. But that's changing rapidly. And I think data lakes have, again, really interesting trade-offs in this space. Of course, when you are doing large-scale training, when you're trying to understand the patterns or the insights that may be hidden in these volumes of data, it helps to have an awful lot of data. This is a sort of a plus in the column of your data lake. The trade-off to that is, as we've seen frequently and in some very high-profile ways, the models that you train from this data are only as good as the data that you put in. So that's both in terms of errors, underlying biases, truly. The models are as good as the data. So this puts a really fine point on that downside or that trade-off of the data lake, which is gathering these mass amounts of data, but perhaps not cleaning it, not organizing it. Perhaps it is redundant. It is of questionable quality. One of the things that I see most interesting at this intersection that I heard alluded to just a bit earlier is not applying data and data lakes toward sort of direct training of AI, but of using AI to understand what value there may be in those lakes, of sort of prospectively looking for patterns, trying to surface things that, with a human in the loop, could lead to some sort of insight, could give a hook for something to explore in those volumes of data, which could then kick off those processes that would make it more valuable, more useful. That validation, that making consistent of what you have, and then actually moving into training models.
Interesting. Okay, Ramesh, what do you think about that? What do you think the impact of AI in context of a data lake? How do you think it's evolving it, and it not only evolving it, but how is it evolving for our benefit, that it might change our strategy for good?
Yeah, I agree with what Jim and Ozzy had said. I think fundamentally the couple of things that the data lake approach really provides is one is that learn by doing, or the iterative nature of a lot of the advanced analytics processes is really something that lends itself very well to big data and cloud platforms, because the storage is relatively inexpensive. The compute can be scaled up and down so that these models can be trained and people can evaluate the results. So in that sense, I think it really provides a platform for enterprises to start delivering upon these new insights, or coming up with these new insights, really. Now, on the other side, for technology platforms like ours, the data lake and the availability of all of this technical resources, computing resources, if you will, is that it allows us to start automating away the complexity in especially data engineers, and definitely data scientists and data analysts' jobs too. The primary purpose of automation is to remove that level of low-level complexity. AI ML allows us to do things to make people's lives easier in actually building analytics. So if there are a couple of tables that somebody needs to join and is not familiar with the data, we can provide recommendations based on advanced analytics techniques and say that here's what you need to do. If somebody is looking at managing a production workflow, being able to predict that the workflow is going to miss its SLA is something that will make people's lives easier. So I think those are all the possibilities. And taking a step back, I think what AI ML really does is help in both those categories. One is data lakes provide the ability to deliver more of these AI ML use cases. AI ML as a technique that is now possible on data lakes allows us to now run these processes so much more efficiently for people who are responsible for delivering analytics in enterprises.
Jim, you started us off down this AI path, and I'm going to let you kind of close it out. So what's your vision for how AI and machine learning really evolve the data lake, and how these organizations can leverage these evolutions for achieving data lake success?
Yeah, AI really touches on two key things: return on the investment and time to value. So if you think of whether it's you're dealing with big data or data lakes, in this case, that investment that you've made, AI can now help to bring that to the forefront. And time to value is what AI can infuse into any company's analytics strategy, because it gives you that head start. So instead, as I mentioned, when you're starting at point zero, you're able to get that, jump start in a faster sense of the word, because now that pattern recognition that AI will bring to the forefront will help drive that analytics journey and strategy for the business. And that is key, right? So a business needs to get value out of everything. And the quicker you get that time to value, the more beneficial, the more successful it is for the business in the end. And if you think a couple of years ago with AI was just a cool little thing as a pet project. Think of Watson and the chess master that were playing, or Watson and Jeopardy years ago. A lot of that technology that was back then, it was a cool thing. You're now competing against the machine and a human. Now that technology, is being brought into the software for analytics from IBM itself, in order for companies to take advantage of these data lakes, big data, and other volumes of data that is, taking too long to consume in a business sense, that they can get value out of it. So I think those two things, the return on investment and time to value, is what AI is going to help, really bring to the forefront for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Jim, do me a favor. Why don't you, for those in the audience that are seeking to, achieve the outcomes we talked about, right, that they want to begin with the business case in mind. They want to automate as much as possible. They want to consider cloud and cloud computing concepts to drive value, right? And they want to use AI and machine learning to really power this next generation of analytics. How is IBM, and specifically the Cognos platform you're involved in, how and why would organizations engage, you and your team and your offerings to help them achieve these outcomes?
Yeah, so, with Cognos Analytics, we've taken a lot of that technology that was in Watson and then eventually made its way to Watson Analytics, which was a cloud-only solution. We've brought that into, Cognos Analytics. So now you can do the exploration, you can do the visualizations, your managed reporting, all in that one source. And part of that, in that exploration and analysis, is what Cognos can help drive those patterns within your data, whether it's, Excel spreadsheets, whether it's a Hadoop structure, a data lake, or anything. As long as we can connect to the source, we can consume it and find those patterns of data with AI in there. Additionally, when you think about, how do you move forward from there? Now, with the advent of R, Python, all of this, in the next release, we're putting the capability of within the product to be able to use Jupyter Notebooks. So you're able to now get the complete integration within that one platform of Cognos, that you can drive that analysis, that exploration from within your data and try and get the maximum ROI and performance that you need to drive your business forward. And for that, the conversation always starts with the business. How do you, help me move my business forward? What can you help me do? And it's an understanding of what challenges they're currently facing and how you can improve their process and actually, maximize their value and ROI from what they're trying to do within their company.
Excellent. Ramesh, how would you summarize how Infoworks is helping organizations achieve their vision with a data analytics strategy?
So Infoworks really automates the entire process of data engineering. So this is typically what people have to do to get data ready for analytics, which is ingesting data from various sources, keeping it synchronized onto a data lake, transforming, preparing, and organizing the data for a multitude of analytics, whether it's BI, reporting, ML, AI, and so on. And so what we focus on is really automating all of these data engineering processes to reduce the data lake and data engineering complexity. So we minimize or eliminate coding completely for data ingestion, data preparation, data operations, and the data governance, which is an important part to make sure that data lakes do not become data swamps. And so what this does is allows data scientists and data analysts to really focus on sort of making use of the data for their analytics rather than worrying about sort of the low-level complexity. One of my colleagues, calls this, the death by 1,000 paper cuts, because that's really all those different things that people have to do to get data ready from source to being ready for consumption. So that's really what Infoworks does. We really focus on the automation. So we have a data engineering platform that offers a zero coding platform for preparing data and making it ready for analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody wants to hear more about Infoworks, I do encourage you to check out an episode of the Big Data Beard podcast that we actually had Ramesh and one of his coworkers join us for, and we'll put a link in the announcements page. But definitely check that out if you want to hear a deeper dive on Infoworks. And speaking of podcast guests, Ozzy, we recorded a show this week. It's going to publish here next week, so people can check that out. But Ozzy, give us a quick summary of where Domino Data Lab fits in this, in customers and organizations' strategy for achieving the outcomes that we want with data lakes and data analytics.
Sure. Yeah. So I'd say where Domino sits is really about understanding your entire process end to end, serving as your system of record for data science and analytics happening in your organization. Basically, we want to empower model-driven organizations and consider that to be really a truly essential capability for any org moving forward. Some of the things that I think would evidence that is we're really unopinionated. So sort of tying into some of the earlier discussion about achieving the properties of a data lake, of answering the right questions, being sort of unopinionated about tools. We have no opinion about the languages that you code in. We have no opinions about the data sources that you consume. We're looking to make all of those things easier, to track everything that is done with those sources, with that code, and enable reproducibility for them. So whether you're running a Jupyter notebook, an RStudio session, a TensorBoard, SAS Studio, we do it all. One thing that I would point out that is new and I think sort of great value for this, we do integrate well with Spark. So those folks who may be running object store-based data lakes using Spark services to query them. Domino is a great pain to tie that together, make that work understandable, trackable, reproducible. And one of our newest features for just general management of data, which I think can speak to some of these values of easy ingestion and democratization, Domino data sets really enables all of those things. It is a very straightforward way to programmatically or manually, if you choose to, create data snapshots that can be seamlessly attached to your runs, your work that you're doing in Domino, again, tying into that reproducibility and sourcing from pretty much anything you can imagine. So it could be an S3 bucket, could be a database somewhere, could be CSVs that you are pulling in. So that's pretty much how I'd sum it up, that we are your orchestrator, your system of record, and where appropriate, we provide some tools that can help you realize some of the properties that you would want from a data lake without the downsides.
That's excellent. I appreciate the summary. Well, gentlemen, it's been great to have you on this this expert panel today, and my hope is that that the audience took away some great actionable steps to really achieve success with the data lake, or with what the version of the data lake you implement in your organization becomes. I do want to shift gears to some questions that we had. So we have a question came in from the audience, and as a reminder to the audience, we are welcoming questions from you. If you'll go ahead and put those in the questions tab on your browser, we will happily try to get through those. But the first question that came in, and I apologize, I don't see who it came from, but there's an ongoing theme here, and we see it in both on this call, but also I think in marketing and in the press. There's this theme around AI and machine learning. But the question is, what about leveraging a data lake for general analytics, like traditional BI, versus maybe like having to use a modern data warehouse? I guess maybe I'll start with Jim, with you. What's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, for this particular thing, traditional BI is evolving, right? So if you think about traditional AI, where you're just doing reports and then you might be doing some visualization, that piece of software has now evolved to what we currently have in our offering with Cognos Analytics, where it has that AI infused in there. So when a client is going to use the product and says, well, I just want to use traditional AI, I'm not going to leverage any of the other stuff, well, they're doing a disservice for themselves. They're not getting the maximum value from the investment they made. So in this case, if you're going to move the data from the data lake into a data warehouse architecture, we can connect to both. It doesn't matter to Cognos. If we can access it, we can leverage it. A data warehouse basically will have cleansed some of that data, will have some structure around it, and so on. But from the BI perspective, there is no concept of traditional BI anymore because that software has evolved for us anyway, where we've infused that, AI and machine learning into it and continue to progress further for it. So the idea is for somebody that is used to a traditional BI, now you have to start looking into that concept and taking advantage of, the AI and the ML. If your data exists in a data warehouse, that's fine. We can access it there, or if it's in a data lake, well, that's fine as well. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The whole idea is taking advantage of all that new technology as well and not thinking about this is what I was used to. How do I do it in this way?
Got to evolve. Totally get that. Did other two gentlemen, do you have comments to add or to that one, or you want to go to the next question?
So one thing I can quickly add is that, I would say that actually, 90%, if not more, of Infoworks customers are running BI and reporting on their data lakes. At the end of the day, enterprises have got a multitude of analytics use cases. Many of them may start with BI and reporting, and it will never end, but they will add other use cases that might use ML and AI. So I don't think, it's going away. The data lake provides an interesting new way of doing some of the traditional analytics, if you will, but now with more data and on a new platform with more agility.
Absolutely. So we have one more question that came in from the audience, and Ozzy, I'm gonna throw this one to you first, and then let Jim and Ramesh jump in if they'd like to. But the question is, how do you deal with the challenge of having to support more than one data platform? And as Ozzy, I know you and I talked, and the folks will hear on the podcast, we talk about that. It seems like everybody claims to be a platform, but the example is like they need to run, both some on-premises applications and multiple cloud platforms. And the question is, how do data lakes help with that? Are there examples of how companies you've seen be successful deal with this idea of having many data platforms with many operation locations?
Sure. Yeah, this is to say a trophy thing. This is a great question, but it is as with many great questions, it heavily depends. So the thing that I would say most directly with this is to echo some of what I mentioned earlier in the data lake discussion, which is it's really about being very deliberate about the questions you're trying to answer, the outcomes that you're trying to drive. The thing that I see most common with the customers that I deal with is actually a thing that I see as being a bit dysfunctional, which is aiming for sort of one true solution. That is the idea that having not even disparate but different platforms is a bad thing. There's certainly nothing wrong with having multiple platforms if they are serving a deliberate purpose. Certainly in the area of things which are data lakes or data lake-like, it's a common thing for someone to have data that is in Redshift as well as, say, querying with Athena if they're in AWS, as well as doing work which is run via Spark. So having data in different places, not necessarily an issue. And then for the data lake specifically, I think the thing that I would point to as potentially a value here, or a way that this can help, one of the benefits of a data lake really is that single source. Even though you're foregoing sort of the cataloging, categorization, the quality potentially, you are putting things in a single source. You're dramatically reducing both the friction to put that data into your lake, and you're also creating really a single source for knowledge, access control, et cetera, for folks who are going to access that, and you're enabling them to use sort of their own best fit technologies and techniques to query that. So if anything, if I was trying to cast it in the best light, I would look as a data lake as potentially being a unifying abstraction between different platforms and different types of data.
I like that concept. That's powerful. Ramesh, how about you? I know at the Infoworks team, has really been focused on allowing your platform to really be cloud agnostic, whether it's an on-prem cloud or public cloud provider. What's your thoughts on how organizations are successfully implementing data lake strategies in this new hybrid cloud world?
Yeah, I mean, one of the realities today is that most enterprises are already, whether they like it or not, in a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud environment. So one of our customers, started off by doing a migration because they said, they had an on-premise data lake, they wanted to move it into the cloud, and of course, Infoworks, helps with that because having a platform with infrastructure independence is necessary. But once they started the migration into one cloud, in this case it was Google Cloud, they realized that another group was already implementing a completely separate data lake that nobody knew about in Azure Cloud. So the challenge is that none of these are going to go away that quickly. Once something starts in an enterprise, it takes a long time for it to be discontinued. So I think the reality that enterprises have to get used to is that their data lakes are going to be all over the place. So having technology and platforms that work across cloud, across hybrid cloud, and also have the portability to say that if I built a data engineering pipeline in one cloud or on-premise, I should be able to easily move it to another one without any change. So the ability to move data, to move processing is really essential as we look ahead to this multi-cloud, hybrid cloud world.
Very good. Well, if there's any other questions from the audience, I'd love to have them put in the panel. But if not, if they don't come in, I think we're going to wrap just in respect of time. Jim, Ozzy, Ramesh, I want to say thank you again for joining us on this expert panel on refining your data lake strategy for success in analytics. Again, my name is Cory Minton, and I highly encourage you to check out bigdatabeard.com or check us out in your favorite podcast app. Again, we talk with the movers and shakers, the interesting people, and the great technology companies that are really making big data success possible in the world. And we encourage you to check it out. Again, it's in your favorite platform. Just check out bigdatabeard.com, just like the announcement says below. Thank you again for your time, and I hope everybody will also enjoy maybe subscribing to our BrightTALK channel if you enjoyed this session, and we'll look forward to producing more sessions just as good, hopefully, as this one, although we set the bar pretty high. Have a wonderful day, folks. Thank you again.
Take care.